He was offered the role of a lifetime, the one that would make him a Hollywood legend overnight. But when his sister collapsed, Keanu Reeves walked away without a word. No cameras, no farewell. Years later, the truth behind his sacrifice finally surfaced, and it changed everything you thought you knew about him. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. It was the kind of morning agents dream about. Bright sky, clear mind, a script under Keanu Reeves's arm that could change his life. The final callback was for a lead role in a big-budget action film, already being buzzed about as a future blockbuster. The kind of project that could catapult an actor from rising star to household name. Directors, producers, casting heads, all were waiting in a downtown studio for one final audition. And Keanu? He was ready. Prepared, grounded, focused. His agent had called him 3 times that morning, alone. Keanu, just be you. They already love you. As Keanu walked into the building, the familiar pulse of nerves kicked in. But underneath that was something else. Not doubt, not fear, just a quiet hope, not for fame, but for stability, for the ability to take care of the people he loved. He was already building a name for himself. This role would only make things easier. He signed in at the front desk, nodded politely to a few other actors in the waiting room, and found a seat in the corner, script still in hand. But he wasn't reading it. He didn't need to anymore. His phone buzzed. He glanced down casually. The caller ID froze him. Kim. She never called during auditions, never wanted to interrupt his work. For her to call now? He stepped into the hallway to answer. Her voice was trembling. Words came in gasps. Keanu, something's wrong, my chest. It hurts. I can't breathe. Where are you? He asked immediately, already turning to leave. Air EMS. ER, they're taking me in now. Ambulance. I'm coming. He hung up. No hesitation, no weighing options. He turned down the hallway, past the door to the audition room, past the agent's coffee corner, past the future he'd been rehearsing for. He walked straight out of the building. His agent spotted him outside. Keanu, where are you going? They're ready for you. I can't do this, Keanu said quietly. What do you mean? This is the one, this is it. Keanu looked up at him, eyes full of something deeper than fear, full of love. My sister's in the hospital. I'm not available. The agent stood frozen, mouth slightly open, stunned by the calmness in Keanu's tone. There wasn't a flicker of regret, not a single backward glance toward the studio doors. Just quiet certainty. By the time the casting director poked her head out, clipboard in hand, Keanu was already disappearing down the block, weaving between traffic to get to his motorcycle, helmet on, engine roaring, the role of a lifetime dissolving behind him like morning fog. Across town, the hospital was chaotic. The ER smelled like antiseptic and tension. Nurses buzzed around Kim as doctors prepped her for tests. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale, tubes, machines, unfamiliar faces. But the second Keanu burst through the doors, her eyes lit up. Hey, she whispered hoarsely. He rushed to her side, brushing the hair off her forehead, gripping her hand tightly. She was hooked up to an oxygen line, the beeping of machines surrounding them like a clock ticking down. They think it's spreading faster, she whispered. They said, Keanu, they said, I might only have weeks. He shook his head. Don't say that. She tried to smile, but tears welled in her eyes. You had the audition today. I had to be somewhere more important, he said, his voice steady, his fingers wrapped around hers. But your career. He leaned closer. You are my life, Kim. What's the point of fame if the people I love aren't there to share it? She closed her eyes, squeezing his hand gently. The pain was intense, but his presence cut through it. For the first time all day, she relaxed. And outside that hospital window, the sun kept rising. Inside, Keanu sat silently beside her, unaware that back in the studio, his name had just been scratched off a list. A new name circled, a different future written. But for Keanu Reeves, the choice had already been made. He had walked away from the door to stardom without flinching, because sometimes the truest measure of a man isn't what he walks toward, but what he's willing to walk away from. And in that quiet hospital room, holding his sister's trembling hand, Keanu knew one thing for certain. He didn't miss anything. He chose everything that mattered. The hospital hallway was eerily quiet as Keanu pushed through the glass doors, his boots echoing against the tile floor. The sterile scent of antiseptic hit him instantly. For a moment, he just stood there, eyes searching, breath shallow, until a nurse pointed him down the corridor to room 214. He found Kim curled on her side in the hospital bed, pale and trembling. Her face lit up slightly when she saw him, but even her smile looked like it hurt. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to come." Keanu dropped his bag in the corner and sat beside her without a word. He took her hand in both of his and kissed her knuckles gently. "I'm exactly where I need to be," he said softly. Just hours earlier, he had been standing under the blazing lights of a film studio, reading lines for a role that could have defined the rest of his career. His agent had called it a career-defining opportunity, the kind of role that doesn't just open doors, it builds an entire mansion behind them. But none of that mattered when Kim's call came through, her voice cracking, breathless. "Keanu, I'm in an ambulance. I don't know what's happening." He didn't wait. He didn't finish the audition. He didn't think twice. He just walked out the studio door, ignoring the stunned looks of the producers and the frantic texts from his agent. Now, sitting by Kim's bedside, watching the heart monitor's gentle rhythm, he was reminded of a promise he made long before fame ever touched his life. It was a memory from a dimly lit kitchen in their childhood home. Keanu was 11, Kim was 8. Their father had just stormed out for good. Their mother sat at the table, silently crying over a pile of bills. Kim had turned to Keanu that night and asked, "Are we going to be okay?" And Keanu, scared but determined, had wrapped his arms around her and whispered, "I'll always protect you." That promise echoed in his mind now as he brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Outside the hospital window, the Hollywood machine kept turning. Directors were reviewing his tapes. Casting announcements were about to go out. His name was supposed to be on that short list. But inside room 214, none of that existed. There was only the slow, steady rise and fall of his sister's chest, the occasional beep of the IV machine, and the fragile thread of hope he refused to let go of. He answered a call from his agent, who wasted no time. "You walked out. Keanu, do you have any idea what this means? They're already looking at your replacement." Keanu stood in the hallway, watching the nurses work behind the glass. His tone was calm but firm. "Tell them I'm not available. You might not get another shot like this." Keanu stared through the window at Kim. "I've already had my shot. I just chose differently." His phone didn't ring again after that. Not for a while. The casting buzz that once surrounded him fell silent. Directors moved on. Scripts he'd been attached to quietly changed names. Keanu Reeves, the rising star with the mysterious edge, had suddenly vanished from the Hollywood radar. And no one in the industry understood why. But Kim did. Every morning she woke to find him already sitting by the window, reading aloud from the tattered poetry book they used to steal lines from as kids. His voice was calm and steady, even when hers faltered from pain. He kept a small notebook in his jacket pocket, tracking every medicine dose, every shift in her temperature, every note from a nurse or doctor. He barely slept, often dozing off upright in the visitor's chair, with his jacket bunched under his head. One afternoon, the attending physician gently pulled Keanu aside. "She's stable but fragile. The next few weeks are critical. If she's going to turn a corner, it'll be now." Keanu just nodded. He already knew. That night, as a cool wind rattled the windows, Kim looked up at him and said, "You know you don't have to stay, right? You have your own life." He gave her a tired smile, touched her hand. You are my life, Kim." They didn't talk about acting. They didn't talk about lost roles or scripts. They talked about childhood, about their mom's goofy holiday traditions, about the time they tried to bake cookies and set off the fire alarm. Keanu was building a wall around her, made of memories and laughter. Anything to hold off the darkness closing in. Even the nurses noticed. "Never leaves," one whispered to another during a night shift. "Most families come and go. He just stays." "I think she'd fade without him here," the other replied. And maybe she would have. Because when her appetite vanished and her pain became unbearable, Keanu refused to let despair take over. He requested new consultations, brought in holistic specialists, tried acupressure and guided meditation. If someone told him there was a 1% chance it could help, he explored it. What no one could quite grasp was that he wasn't doing it out of desperation. He was doing it out of love. The kind that doesn't measure time or cost or career ambition. The kind that simply shows up again and again until showing up becomes the fight itself. Weeks passed. Hospital staff began scheduling their shifts around Keanu's steady presence, quietly working around his recliner and notebook as if he were part of the medical team. He learned how to adjust the IV, how to tilt Kim's bed just right to ease her nausea, how to advocate when the lab results didn't add up. He wasn't a movie star anymore. He was a brother, nothing more and nothing less. His agent called again, just once, left a voicemail. "Keanu, they're moving forward with the film. They gave the role to someone else. This could have been huge." He didn't listen to the whole message. He deleted it, walked back into the hospital room and sat down next to Kim. She was asleep, pale and trembling under a thin blanket. Her breath was shallow, uneven. Keanu reached for her hand and whispered, "No spotlight in the world could outshine you, sis." A nurse later found him like that, still sitting, still holding her hand, eyes red but calm. She gently laid a blanket over his shoulders and said, "You're doing more for her than medicine ever could." And maybe that was the truth. In a world obsessed with fame, Keanu Reeves chose something else. He chose family, he chose love, and he never looked back. The envelope sat untouched on the kitchen table for 3 days. Cream-colored, embossed with the studio's insignia in gold foil. Inside was a contract that could have launched Keanu Reeves into the Hollywood stratosphere. A 7-figure deal, front-page headlines, everything his agent said he'd worked for. But Keanu never opened it. Not once. He walked past it each morning, brushing crumbs off the counter, refilling Kim's tea, checking her meds. The offer loomed in the corner like a silent dare, one that never tempted him. Not even a little. Kim noticed it on the second day. Her body was still weak, pale from the last round of chemo, but her eyes never missed a detail. "Is that from the movie?" she asked softly. Keanu nodded but said nothing. She watched him move around the room with the same quiet strength that had carried her through the darkest weeks. But something in her shifted. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "Key," she said, using the childhood nickname, "you need to open it." Keanu knelt beside her recliner and took her hand. "Yes, you do." "No," he whispered. "What I need is right here." She tried to laugh, but it caught in her throat. "I don't want to be the reason you walk away from your dream." "You're not," he said. "You're the reason I know what matters." Still, she looked at the envelope. "You earned that role." He reached for a blanket and wrapped it around her legs. "Maybe. But that role won't hold your hand when the nausea hits. It won't bring you soup or read you poetry at 2 a.m. That role won't save you. And that's all I care about." Kim's eyes welled with tears, but she nodded. She knew better than to argue with him when his voice dropped to that steady whisper, the voice of resolve, the voice of their mother, of their shared losses, of every time he'd stood between her and the chaos of the world. Outside, Los Angeles glittered with the promise of red carpets and marquees, but inside that modest bungalow, everything that truly mattered lived in a single room. The next morning, Keanu picked up the envelope. Not to open it, but to toss it unopened into the drawer with old scripts and expired passports. That chapter, whatever it could have been, was never his to chase. He belonged here, beside her. By the end of the week, word had spread through the agency circuit. Keanu Reeves passed on the role. Executives were baffled. "He's either a genius or a fool," one producer reportedly said. The part went to another young actor, a rising star with a perfect jawline and studio backing. The film would go on to break box office records. Critics hailed it as a defining cinematic moment of the decade. Keanu never saw it. Not because of bitterness, he simply didn't have the time. Kim's condition had stabilized for the moment, but she was still in a fragile state. Some nights she'd shake uncontrollably. Others she barely moved. Keanu kept a logbook by her bed, tracking her meds, her appetite, every tiny change in skin color or breath pattern. He'd become a quiet student of survival. A close friend dropped by and noticed the unopened script sitting next to a bowl of herbal tea. "You really didn't even read it?" he asked, half in disbelief. Keanu smiled without looking up. "I didn't need to." The friend looked around the house at the soft lighting, the scent of lavender from the diffuser, the faint jazz playing from the record player. "Man, this place is like a recovery temple." Keanu finally looked up. That's the goal. There was no regret in his voice, no flicker of what if. Kim saw it too. One morning, after a particularly rough night, she reached for Keanu's hand. "You know you're still my big brother, even if you're not famous." He smirked. "I was never trying to be famous. I just wanted to tell stories." "Well," she said, voice thin but steady, "you're telling one now, just not the kind Hollywood makes." They both laughed at that. But the truth hung between them like a lantern, soft, steady, and sacred. He had chosen love over legacy, and in doing so, he created a new kind of legacy entirely. By the time the studio officially announced the recast, Keanu was in the middle of organizing Kim's home care transition. The tabloids ran stories. Keanu walks away from career-defining role, and Hollywood's quietest star makes loudest statement yet. But Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't respond. He didn't even own a TV. Instead, he learned how to administer injections, how to position pillows to relieve spinal pressure, how to blend protein shakes Kim could sip without pain. He wasn't just her brother. He was her nurse, her chauffeur, her night shift guard against fear. And Kim knew it. One afternoon, as Keanu adjusted the curtains to soften the glare on her face, Kim whispered, "What if you resent me for this someday?" He turned, leaned close, and brushed a strand of hair from her temple. "Kim, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She believed him, not just because of his words, but because of the way he said them. Without hesitation, without bitterness, with a peace that no award, no red carpet could ever bring. The recast actor went on to win a major award for the film. At the ceremony, he thanked the man who turned down the role. "Keanu Reeves," he said into the microphone, "you gave me this, but more than that, you reminded all of us what really matters. You chose love over fame. That's rare." The audience gave a standing ovation. Keanu wasn't watching. He was at home, reading Kim a chapter from her favorite novel, his voice calm and steady. She drifted off to sleep mid-sentence, a faint smile still on her lips. The unopened contract? Still in a drawer. Yellowed, slightly curled at the edges, untouched by ambition or regret. Keanu would never say it out loud, but that drawer wasn't hiding a missed opportunity. It was holding a reminder. Some roles are played in silence, without cameras, without applause. And sometimes, they're the ones that matter most. Rumors had a way of growing teeth. As the days passed after Keanu's quiet exit from the blockbuster project, the press went from puzzled to critical. Headlines popped up like weeds across entertainment blogs and gossip magazines. Keanu flakes on career, too moody to commit. Has Hollywood's lone wolf finally lost it? And through it all, Keanu said nothing. His silence wasn't a tactic. It wasn't a calculated PR move or a media strategy. It was something deeper, instinctual. Protecting his sister's privacy meant more to him than salvaging a public image. Not everything had to be explained, he believed. Not every act of love needed an audience. But the industry didn't see it that way. Publicists begged him to release a statement. "You don't have to go into detail," one of them said. "Just say it was a personal emergency, anything to stop the bleeding." But Keanu shook his head. "If I have to explain love to save a career, I don't want the career." And with that, he let go. Studio phones stopped ringing, scripts stopped arriving, auditions that had once landed in his lap now bypassed him entirely. Even his agent, who had stuck with him through thin years, began to falter. "You can't build a career on mystery, Keanu," she warned during a phone call that ended colder than it began. "People are starting to think you're unreliable." He didn't argue. He simply said, "Let them." Meanwhile, his days were spent walking sterile hospital halls. While the world outside spun with speculation and gossip, Keanu focused on relearning the sound of Kim's voice when she wasn't in pain. He learned to decode every subtle shift in her breathing, every wince disguised behind a smile. She was pale, her frame thinner by the week, but still she tried to laugh. For him. The world saw a vanished actor. Keanu saw a sister who needed help standing up. When the chemo left her too weak to rise from bed, he became her support. He'd stand behind her, arms under her elbows, and whisper, "One more step, just one." And when she trembled, he knelt beside her, patient and calm. At night, when she slept, he studied anatomy diagrams taped to the walls. Not for any film, not for any role, just so he'd understand what the doctors weren't saying. He took no credit, made no complaints, and kept no schedule. The only time that mattered was hers. The industry could wait. But it wasn't just the industry turning cold. Friends began pulling away too, unable to understand his choice. One director texted, "You're throwing away your life for someone else's illness." Keanu never responded. Because they didn't know. They didn't know what it was like to feel someone else's heartbeat weaken beside you and decide that no dream, no spotlight, no applause could matter more than holding on to it. He'd already made his choice, and every moment with Kim confirmed it was the right one. The silence outside grew louder. Paparazzi, once eager to catch a glimpse of Keanu at red carpet events or hip cafes, now didn't know where to look. He'd vanished from the places that made stars shine. No premieres, no interviews, no cameos, just a name being whispered behind studio doors, usually followed by sighs or silence. Some accused him of being difficult. Others said he was battling depression or that he'd turned eccentric. And a few just moved on, scrubbing his name from casting boards entirely. But inside Kim's hospital room, nothing mattered except her breathing, her color, the way her fingers curled weakly around the blanket. Every morning, Keanu arrived with her favorite smoothie, blended just the way she liked it, and a book tucked under his arm. He'd read to her for hours, everything from old poetry to absurd comedy scripts he thought might make her laugh. When she winced at the pain, he paused only to reach for her hand. Sometimes her eyes fluttered open just enough to catch a glimpse of him. "You're still here," she'd whisper. "Always," he'd answer. Outside the room, he remained an enigma. Doctors and nurses were used to celebrities disappearing behind security, but Keanu never asked for special treatment. He slept on a recliner, he folded his own blankets, and when an intern asked him once if he was really that Keanu Reeves, he simply nodded and said, "That doesn't matter right now, she does." The hallway became his runway, the coffee machine his backstage. Every corner of that hospital held pieces of a life he'd chosen without regret. Still, the world kept turning. Kim, more lucid one afternoon, noticed his sunken eyes. "You look tired," she murmured. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Just trying to keep up with you." She frowned. "Don't let me ruin your life." That stopped him. "You're not ruining anything," he whispered. "You're reminding me what it's for." He could have walked away, could have saved face, salvaged his standing, spun a story for the press. But to what end? A film? A paycheck? An award gathering dust? Instead, he held on to the only thing that felt real. And when her hands began trembling from the treatments, he started massaging her fingers, gently, nightly, whispering stories from their childhood, the ones with imaginary dragons and backyard forts made of pillows. He filled the hospital with memory, with softness, with the kind of presence that couldn't be scheduled or manufactured. Love was his only role now, and he played it without needing a script. Weeks turned into months. Offers dried up. Keanu's agent, once his fiercest advocate, stopped calling altogether. Scripts that would have come with gift baskets and personal notes from directors were now being forwarded elsewhere. Quietly, without explanation. Even friends began to drift, not out of cruelty, but out of confusion. Hollywood was a current, and Keanu had stepped out of the stream. No parties, no networking, no just show up for 10 minutes favors. He missed everything that could have kept his face alive in casting rooms. But he didn't seem to care. At the hospital, life took on a slower, more sacred rhythm. Keanu learned to change IV bags. He learned which songs calmed her down during her most painful episodes. He sketched out a vision board for her recovery. A corkboard filled with pictures of places they would go when she was better. The Oregon coast, a quiet cafe in Florence, a trail they hiked as kids. Then came the day when Kim's legs couldn't hold her weight anymore. Chemo had drained her, weakened her muscles. The doctors told her to be patient, that it might take weeks to stand again. That same day, Keanu cleared the room. He brought in a simple wooden chair from home, something sturdy, familiar. He knelt beside it, held out his arms and whispered, Kim blinked. "What if I fall?" "Then I'll catch you." She reached for him. With every ounce of effort, she pushed herself upright. Her knees wobbled, her hands trembled, but Keanu never looked away. His eyes held her steady when her legs couldn't. She stood for 3 seconds, then 5. And when she finally collapsed into his arms, gasping but smiling, he didn't say a word. He just held her. Outside, the tabloids continued their narrative. Keanu Reeves, the actor who vanished. Rumors of retirement. Speculation of breakdowns. But inside that hospital, a brother was teaching his sister to walk again. Step by quiet step. No red carpets, no applause, just love. And in the stillness of those late nights, when the world forgot him, when the city lights dimmed, he wrote in his journal, "I used to chase roles that would change my life, but I found one that saved hers." Backlash didn't break him. Silence didn't scare him. Fame didn't own him. Keanu wasn't lost. He was exactly where he needed to be. The days bled into nights, and still Keanu stayed close. As Kim's immune system struggled to recover, new complications emerged. Infections that once seemed minor now loomed with deadly threat. A simple fever could spiral, a cough could become pneumonia. Her breathing sometimes slowed to a frightening rhythm that made Keanu sit up, eyes wide, watching her chest rise and fall through the hours. Rather than risk constant drives between studios and the hospital, Keanu quietly bought a small apartment just blocks away. It wasn't much, a second-floor walk-up, creaky floorboards, paper-thin walls, but it was close enough that he could be at Kim's side within minutes. That was all he needed. He furnished it with the basics, a mattress on the floor, a desk for research, and a battered kitchen table. The only photos on the wall were of him and Kim from childhood, one of her smiling in a treehouse, another of the two of them racing down a hill on bikes with scraped knees and laughing faces. Each morning, he packed a tote bag with food he cooked himself. Vegetable soups, rice, broths, smoothies Kim could tolerate. He studied nutrition like it was a second script, learning which foods could calm inflammation or support immunity. Nurses whispered to each other how rare it was to see a celebrity sitting cross-legged on the hospital floor, spoon-feeding his sister pureed carrots while humming softly to keep her calm. At night, after her medications kicked in and her pain ebbed slightly, Keanu would read aloud. Poetry. Letters from fans she used to follow. Even the silly sci-fi stories they'd made up as kids. He made sure the last thing she heard before sleep was love, not fear. One particularly rough evening, when Kim's oxygen levels dipped and alarms screamed, Keanu clutched her hand and whispered gently, "It's okay, I'm right here. I've got you." Nurses rushed in, doctors adjusted meds. The moment passed, but Kim didn't open her eyes for hours. When she finally stirred, her voice was weak and raspy. "Why are you still here?" Keanu smiled, tired but steady. "Because you are." She blinked slowly, lips trembling. "You gave up everything for me." Keanu leaned closer and tucked a strand of her hair under the hospital cap. "No, Kim, you are everything." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and Keanu didn't wipe them. He let her feel them, knowing that pain and healing sometimes came through the same door. The hospital staff began noticing patterns. Every nurse on the evening shift knew to expect Keanu's quiet knock at the back entrance before visiting hours technically resumed. He never made a scene, never asked for exceptions, but when someone was struggling with charting or pushing a meds cart, they'd look up to see him already helping, moving a chair, refilling a water jug, adjusting the IV pole so it wouldn't snag on Kim's bedrail. There was no celebrity in that room, just a brother. The room became their cocoon. Keanu filled the silence with gentle background music, old records Kim used to dance to as a teenager. He played cassette tapes of ocean waves and rustling leaves when the pain got too loud for words. In the early hours, when sleep was impossible and Kim's nausea crept back, they played cards. Slowly, silently, laughing without sound when one of them cheated. Outside the walls, the world spun on. Films were being cast. Headlines speculated about his absence. Some articles questioned whether he was battling depression or drug use. Others guessed he was taking time off for creative burnout. Not a single story guessed the truth. And Keanu never corrected them. He turned down interviews, let his agent shield him, declined invites to red carpets with a simple message, "I'm not available at this time." Even his closest friends didn't know how deep it went. A few stopped calling. Others urged him to return to work, saying Kim would want that. But Keanu wasn't looking for approval. He was focused on presence, on being right where he was, no matter how hard it got. One night, after an especially difficult chemo round, Kim couldn't stop shaking. Her teeth chattered. Her skin was cold, then burning hot. Keanu wrapped her in blankets, adjusted the thermostat, rubbed her arms, whispered stories from their childhood, anything to distract her from the edge. When the tremors eased, she looked at him, eyes glassy. "Promise me something?" He leaned in, brushing damp hair off her forehead. "Anything. Don't stop living. After me." The breath caught in his chest. He swallowed. "You're not going anywhere. But if I do, keep living, Keanu." He nodded slowly, not because he believed her fate was sealed, but because he loved her enough to listen. Then, without saying another word, he opened the window to let in the night breeze and sat beside her until dawn. Weeks passed. Kim's body grew more fragile, but her will stayed intact. Keanu adjusted his entire routine around her new medication schedule. He marked times on the wall with sticky notes, set alarms with soft chimes. He learned how to clean a central line, how to prep meals that wouldn't upset her stomach, how to recognize signs of dangerous drops in her oxygen levels. He became more than a caregiver. He became her rhythm. Their bond deepened in the silence. Words were often replaced with glances, a squeeze of the hand, a quiet nod. They'd sit by the window during late afternoons, watching the light shift through the slats of the blinds. Sometimes they would reminisce. Other times they'd just exist, side by side, not needing to fill the space with anything more than their presence. One evening, after Kim finally drifted into a deep sleep, Keanu walked into the small kitchenette and began preparing tea. The radio played softly, an old Nina Simone song. He paused, listening, then sat down at the tiny table and stared at his reflection in the window glass. His eyes were tired, but clear. He pulled out a notebook and began to write. Not a script, not a line of dialogue, just a simple journal entry. "Tonight?" she smiled. Her eyes lit up when I made her laugh. The world missed that, but I didn't. The next morning, Kim woke up stronger. Just a little. She sat up with help and asked to brush her hair, even though it was thinning. Keanu handed her the brush without hesitation. She stared at him, her voice shaky. "You gave up everything for me." He knelt beside her and looked straight into her eyes. "You are everything." Tears streamed down her cheeks. He held her, arms wrapped gently, as if she might shatter, but also as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever carried. Behind closed doors, the world saw a man vanishing from fame. But inside that small apartment near the hospital, a brother was making history of the heart. The movie was everywhere. Billboards towered above Sunset Boulevard. Trailers blasted across television screens, each one ending with the name Keanu had once dreamed of seeing in lights, only it wasn't his. The film he had walked away from became the cinematic event of the year. Critics called it career-defining, generation-shaping, and the role every actor dreamed of. But Keanu didn't flinch. He sat in the corner of Kim's hospital room with a paperback novel in his lap, the TV turned down low, feeding her spoonfuls of broth. Her hands trembled too much to hold the spoon herself. On the screen behind him, the actor who had replaced Keanu was accepting a Golden Globe. "I almost didn't get this part," he said into the microphone. "Somebody else was up for it first. Whoever you are, thank you." Keanu didn't look up. Later that week, he clipped an article from Variety, a cover story about the movie's box office domination. He folded it carefully and placed it into a manila folder that he labeled with a Sharpie, Alternate Universe. It sat at the bottom of his closet, under a stack of old photo albums and one worn leather jacket. Not out of bitterness, just remembrance. A reminder of the path not taken. Kim was the only one who ever noticed the folder. One afternoon, between appointments, she found it while looking for extra blankets. "Alternate universe?" she asked, eyebrows raised. Keanu smiled gently. "The one where I made it big, but you didn't make it at all." She didn't say anything. She just reached for his hand, her eyes full. Kim's health had stabilized just enough for short walks around the apartment. One afternoon, while Keanu was washing dishes, he heard her laugh from the living room. It had been weeks since he'd heard that sound. Fragile, but alive. He peeked in. On the screen was an interview. The actor who'd taken the role was on a late-night talk show. The host asked him about the film's unexpected success and whether he'd always been the first choice. The actor paused. "No," he said candidly, "I wasn't. Keanu Reeves was." The crowd gasped. He continued, "I heard later that he walked away from the project the day of his final audition. Nobody knew why. I didn't either. Until a few months ago." Keanu froze. "I was filming a new project," the actor said, and one of the production assistants mentioned how Keanu had put his entire life on hold to care for his sister. Apparently, she was gravely ill, and he just dropped everything. The host sat stunned. The audience clapped slowly, the applause building like a wave. The actor looked into the camera and said, "So Keanu, if you're watching this, you gave me my career, and more importantly, you reminded all of us what real priorities look like. You chose love over fame." That's rare. Kim turned the TV off and sat back in silence. When Keanu walked in, she just looked at him. Her eyes were glossy but bright. "You heard that?" she asked. He nodded, drying his hands on a towel. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. Keanu knelt beside her chair, took her hand, and kissed her knuckles. "No," he whispered. "Because you're here." And he's right. I didn't choose wrong. I just chose differently. Kim rested her forehead on his. "You gave me a future. I'd trade every movie in the world for that." They sat like that for a long time, two lives woven by sacrifice, healing in the spaces fame couldn't reach. Later that night, Keanu sat alone on the fire escape outside their apartment. The city lights flickered like distant stars. In his lap rested the worn folder labeled Alternate Universe. He flipped it open and reread the headlines. Blockbuster hits $400 million at box office. Breakout star shines in role, originally meant for Keanu Reeves. Critics rave, best performance of the year. Each article had been clipped neatly, flattened and stored, never out of bitterness, but out of reverence. It wasn't about the role he'd lost. It was about the man who stepped into it and acknowledged what Keanu had given up. Inside the folder, tucked between two press clippings, was a handwritten note. Not from Kim, from Keanu himself. "You made the right call. You'll never get credit for it, and that's okay. Some victories aren't meant for the spotlight. But you'll remember, and she will too." He closed the folder and exhaled. The next morning, he taped one of the articles to Kim's wall, just above her bed. When she woke, she smiled at it. "Is that your way of saying you're proud of the guy?" she teased. Keanu shrugged. "He did good." "You did better," she said. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. That day, Kim managed to walk to the kitchen with only a slight tremble in her step. Keanu documented it on a camcorder. Nothing fancy, just for them. When she sat down to rest, he played it back for her. They laughed together, the sound echoing against the quiet apartment walls. Later, while she napped, he opened a fresh notebook and scribbled something across the top of the page. "The role I never took, the life I never lost." And beneath it, a single sentence. "Some roles give you fame, others give you forever." The hospital corridor was quiet, almost serene in the early morning light. Keanu moved through it like a shadow. No entourage, no cameras, no attention. Just a man with weary eyes and a quiet purpose. Every nurse knew him by now. Some nodded respectfully, others left him be. But none of them truly understood the weight he carried. Not until Evelyn noticed the pattern. It began with a whispered conversation in the billing office. A young mother was crying, clutching a pink envelope of medical invoices. By the time Evelyn returned from her coffee break, the woman was gone, her tears replaced by stunned silence. The bill? Cleared. The clerk wouldn't say by who, but Evelyn had a guess. A week later, it happened again. A teenage boy in the chemo ward was approved for an experimental treatment his family couldn't afford. The attending doctor seemed as surprised as the parents. Evelyn checked the system. No record of donation, just covered. That's when she knew. Quiet acts of grace moving through the hospital like wind. Invisible but unmistakable. Keanu never spoke of it. He didn't want thanks or recognition. It wasn't charity, it was duty. An extension of the same loyalty that had led him to give up everything for Kim. The same heart that had turned down $1 million role for a hospital room recliner. And now, while his sister slowly regained strength, he quietly stood guard for others too weak to fight for themselves. He avoided the spotlight deliberately. Red carpet invitations went unanswered. Studio emails sat unopened. He turned down a high-preference interview with a respected journalist. Evelyn overheard the call. "I'm not the story. My sister's healing is." Then he hung up. The world, meanwhile, began to ask questions. Where had Keanu Reeves gone? The question started as whispers in industry circles, then crept into media headlines. Hollywood's most wanted star disappears. Keanu Reeves' career suicide or private crisis. Tabloids speculated everything from secret rehab to creative burnout, but none came close to the truth. Evelyn watched it unfold on a waiting room TV one evening as Kim dozed off in her hospital bed. She glanced at Keanu, who sat beside his sister, sketching in a notebook, completely unaffected by the noise. The truth was simpler and more powerful than any headline. He was exactly where he wanted to be. One afternoon, Evelyn confronted him gently in the hallway near the pediatric wing. "I know it's you," she said softly, careful to keep her voice low. "The bills, the gifts, the anonymous donations. It's you." Keanu hesitated, then nodded slightly. Not a confession, not a boast, just acknowledgement. "I won't tell anyone," Evelyn promised. "But you should know it matters." He looked her in the eyes for the first time that day. There was exhaustion, yes, but also quiet resolve. If they feel seen, if it gives them a little more time, then I did my part. After that, Evelyn became his silent accomplice. When families were on the verge of giving up, she found ways to route them to the right person in billing. Keanu left envelopes, made quiet calls, used a pseudonym. Never once did he stay to hear the gratitude. He didn't need it. He was too busy making sure Kim ate one more spoonful, stood one more time, smiled one more day. To the world, Keanu Reeves had vanished, but inside the hospital he was becoming legend, not because of who he was on screen, but because of what he did when no one was watching. Months passed. Kim's health fluctuated. Some days full of energy, others dark and frightening. But through it all, Keanu remained grounded, her unwavering anchor. He learned how to manage feeding tubes, how to change IV bags, how to read a white blood cell chart like a doctor. On nights when she couldn't sleep, they'd listen to old jazz records in the dark. The music became their lullaby, the quiet hum of horns and piano replacing fear with presence. Meanwhile, Evelyn's quiet admiration for Keanu turned into a deep, unspoken respect. She'd sometimes find him in the break room heating up soup, not for himself, but for a kid down the hall whose parents couldn't make it that night. No cameras, no applause, just quiet action. Then one evening, as Keanu sat beside Kim reading a battered copy of The Little Prince, Evelyn peeked into the room and took a photo, just for herself. No flash, no intention of sharing, just something to remember what selflessness looked like. The photo was grainy, the light soft. In it, Kim's head was resting on Keanu's shoulder, eyes half closed in peace. His mouth was moving mid-sentence, the book gently resting in his lap. It looked like any ordinary moment, except it was everything. Outside the hospital, the media frenzy escalated. Where is Keanu Reeves? Rumors intensified, careers rose and fell. But inside those walls, time slowed. Healing, laughter, and sacrifice lived here. One day, a card appeared on the nurse's bulletin board. It read, "To the invisible heroes, not every gift has a receipt, but you've given me life." Signed only with a K. No one needed to ask who wrote it. They all knew. The man Hollywood was searching for hadn't disappeared. He had simply chosen a different kind of stage, one without lights, without scripts, but with the most important audience of all. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of the tiny hospital room, casting a warm glow on the edge of Keanu's notebook. He was writing again, just as he had every morning since Kim's diagnosis, penning a few lines of hope before she woke up. The rhythm of the ventilator, the quiet shuffle of nurses outside, the smell of sterile linen. These were the background notes of their symphony of survival. Outside, the world moved on. Films premiered, celebrities walked red carpets, box office numbers soared. Keanu's name, once a whisper of potential greatness, had grown quiet. He didn't care. His gaze never strayed far from Kim, and his hands rarely left hers. Then something changed. It started with a curious message in a journalist's inbox. Evelyn, the nurse who had quietly watched Keanu for months, had reached out, not for attention, not for fame, but because the world, she believed, needed to understand what love looked like when no cameras were rolling. The journalist, Nora Delgado, didn't expect much, but the further she dug, the more stunned she became. Unopened offers, declined press tours, massive roles passed up with no explanation. Each thread led back to one truth: Keanu Reeves had vanished from Hollywood, not because he failed, but because he chose. She spent weeks compiling timelines, speaking to colleagues, gathering old interviews. Every moment built a bigger picture, and then she found the story that tipped everything. A source inside the production team of a now iconic action film confirmed it. Keanu had been the studio's top pick. He was offered the role, even signed preliminary paperwork. But right before contracts were finalized, he had walked away. No one knew why. No public statement, no scandal, no fallout. He had simply disappeared. That was the moment Nora titled her article, "The Role Keanu Turned Down for Love." When it was published, the internet exploded. The piece detailed everything: his quiet hospital stays, his walks through the oncology wing, his makeshift apartment, the side work he did to fund treatments for other families in need. There were no quotes from Keanu, only what others had observed. It was raw, respectful, and profoundly moving. Fans flooded comment sections with support. "I always knew there was more to him," one wrote. "This isn't just an actor, this is a man." The story went viral within hours. News anchors picked it up. Morning talk shows read excerpts live on air. Celebrities began posting tributes, thanking Keanu for reminding them of what mattered. But Keanu didn't respond. Not yet. He stayed by Kim's side, unaware that the world was, finally, beginning to understand the depth of the role he had taken on, not in film, but in life. The day the article went viral, Keanu's phone didn't stop buzzing. Dozens of messages poured in. Calls from studios, directors he hadn't heard from in years, old friends now suddenly remembering his number. Agents he'd never worked with were offering six-figure deals, gushing about how his heart was the role audiences had been missing. He turned off the phone and tucked it into a drawer. Kim noticed the sudden energy around them. A nurse mentioned the article in passing. One of the doctors, usually reserved and clinical, offered a gentle handshake to Keanu after rounds and whispered, "You gave us all something to believe in." Still, he said nothing publicly. In their quiet apartment, Keanu and Kim shared breakfast as they always did. Toast, orange juice, her favorite blueberry yogurt. The only change was the silence between bites. Kim finally broke it. "I saw it," she said. He paused. "The article?" She nodded. "You didn't write it, but it read like one of your letters. Just from the world this time." He smiled softly. "It's not about me." "No," she said. "It's about love, and people are hungry for it." That afternoon, as they sat together on the balcony overlooking a tiny slice of the city, an email came through, different from the others. Not a script, not an offer, just a short note from the man who had taken the role Keanu once walked away from. It read, "Dear Keanu, I don't know if you remember me. We met once, briefly, during a table read. You were gracious then, and you've been silent since. I didn't know the full story. None of us did. I got famous because you gave up something big. But I realize now you didn't lose anything. You gained something I didn't understand at the time. You chose love over legacy. That's rare, and it's heroic. Thank you for what you gave me and for what you gave her. Liam." Keanu read the message twice, then handed it to Kim. She looked at him through tear-rimmed eyes. "Now they know." He just nodded, his expression unreadable. But for the first time in months, his shoulders relaxed slightly, like the weight he'd been carrying was shared now by the world. Understood, if only in part. The world had found out the truth. But for Keanu, the victory wasn't in the recognition. It was in Kim's steady breath beside him, and the fact that he'd made it through without once abandoning the role that mattered most. The ripple effect of the article was deeper than Keanu had imagined. It wasn't just headlines, it was movement. Letters began arriving in hand-addressed envelopes. Some were from fans, others were from strangers, single mothers, caregivers, siblings, cancer survivors. All of them writing to say one thing: "You made me feel less alone." One letter stood out. It came from a teenage girl named Marisol, whose older brother had dropped out of school to care for her during leukemia. She wrote about how watching Kim and Keanu's story unfold gave her hope, and how her brother, like Keanu, had refused to leave her side. "I thought heroes lived in comic books," she wrote, "but they live in hospital rooms too." Keanu read that one aloud to Kim. She didn't speak, just reached over and took his hand. That week, Kim insisted on stepping outside for the first time in months. Wrapped in a soft scarf and oversized coat, she shuffled slowly to the sidewalk, leaning on Keanu's arm. The world watched now, but he wasn't acting, he wasn't posing. He was just walking his sister home from the storm. At a nearby cafe, a mother with a toddler whispered, "That's him." Her husband nodded but didn't approach. They just looked, grateful, not for a movie, but for a reminder that quiet loyalty still existed. Meanwhile, Hollywood began rebranding Keanu's absence as a legend. The man who walked away, the role that built another's career, a sacrifice only a real star would make. But for Keanu, the only label he accepted was brother. He kept the emails, the articles, even Liam's handwritten note. He placed them all in a leather-bound folder titled simply, "Why It Was Worth It." One evening, as he tucked Kim into bed and dimmed the lights, she whispered, "Do you ever wish you'd taken that role?" He stood in the doorway, watching her breathe. Then he said softly, "I already had the role of a lifetime." She smiled in the dark. "You nailed it." The door clicked gently behind him as he stepped into the hallway, the quiet of the apartment wrapping around him like a soft echo. He didn't need the world to understand anymore. It already had. What mattered now was the warmth behind that bedroom door, and the fact that the choice he made, once invisible, had become a beacon for people who chose love to. Keanu stood at the edge of the hospital's rooftop garden, watching the golden sun rise over the city skyline. The dawn light washed over his face, softening the lines that had deepened over the past few years. Behind him, Kim sat bundled in a cozy fleece blanket, her legs tucked beneath her on a wicker bench, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "Promise me something," she said, breaking the silence. He turned slowly, eyebrows raised in curiosity. "Promise me you'll go back." Keanu didn't need to ask what she meant. Her voice was calm, steady, but laced with a quiet insistence. They'd been here before, at the edge of a moment that could shift everything. "I'm not ready to leave you," he replied gently. "I'm not asking you to," she said. "But I'm not dying, Kay. I'm living, and you've given me years of your life. Let me give you a little of yours back." He sat beside her, letting the weight of her words sink in. The last few years had blurred into hospital corridors, medication charts, whispered prayers, and midnight panic. But now, she was getting stronger. Her latest scans had shown significant improvement. The doctors weren't calling it remission yet, but the tone had changed. Hope was no longer a distant concept. It was in the room. She placed something in his hand, a script. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "It was on your desk for months." He laughed softly. "You've been snooping?" "No, I've been waiting." The script was for a small indie film, a character-driven drama about grief, regret, and redemption. No guns, no car chases, just a story that mattered. Keanu had been drawn to it instantly when it first arrived, but hadn't opened it since Kim's relapse. "You should take this," she said. "Do it for both of us." He nodded slowly, uncertain but moved. That night, he reread the script cover to cover. By morning, he had called the director himself. No agents, no lawyers, just a quiet voice on the other end of the line saying, "I'd be honored to tell this story." Filming began 3 weeks later in a small coastal town north of Santa Barbara. It wasn't a glamorous shoot, tight budget, tiny crew, and barely enough equipment, but Keanu didn't care. There were no trailers, no bodyguards, no expectations. Just a story to live inside. And for the first time in years, he felt the weight begin to lift. The film set was built into the bones of a weathered old house perched above the crashing waves. There was no soundstage, no fabricated glamour, only creaking floorboards, sea-salted windows, and the rawness of real emotion. And Keanu thrived in it. He arrived first each morning, sometimes before the crew, helping move light stands and furniture, often brewing coffee for the younger interns. No ego, no image to protect. It wasn't about the spotlight anymore. It was about the truth. Word slowly leaked out that Keanu Reeves was working on a micro-budget indie. Journalists speculated, fans grew curious, but Keanu ignored the noise. He poured himself into the role, a grieving father searching for forgiveness after abandoning his family. The script echoed parts of his own past, and when he looked into the camera, it was like watching someone unearth years of buried ache. Then, on a Wednesday morning halfway through filming, Kim showed up. The crew paused as she stepped out of the transport van, thin but smiling, a scarf wrapped around her short hair. She moved slowly but steadily toward the house, waving away the production assistant's offer of a wheelchair. Keanu came out to meet her, and for a long moment they just held each other in silence. "Ready to see what you got me into?" he whispered, grinning. She nodded. "Only if you cry on camera. I want proof you're still human." That day, she sat behind the monitor next to the director, bundled in blankets, a quiet strength in her presence. When Keanu delivered a gut-wrenching monologue at sunset, his voice cracking, tears falling, it wasn't just the character breaking, it was Keanu, letting go of years of fear, pain, and gratitude, all for her. When the director yelled cut, the entire set stood in stunned silence. Then applause broke out. Not for the scene, but for the man behind it. Kim wiped her eyes and whispered, "Now, that's the Keanu I know." As the days passed, Kim became a quiet fixture on set. The crew adored her. She shared jokes, handed out snacks, and reminded everyone why they were there. Not for fame or fortune, but for love, art, and second chances. One afternoon, during a break in shooting, Keanu caught her sketching in a worn journal. It was a drawing of the scene they'd filmed earlier, him standing by a broken fence under fading light. Her pencil strokes were soft, but full of emotion. "I don't know how you always see the soul of things," Keanu murmured. Kim smiled. "Maybe I learned from you." When the film wrapped, there was no red carpet, no paparazzi, no thunderous premiere. Just a small screening at a local theater, filled with cast, crew, and loved ones. Kim sat in the center, hand in Keanu's, both of them breathless as the credits rolled and the lights came up. A few weeks later, critics called the film raw, mesmerizing, and a quiet triumph. Audiences connected deeply to it, but few knew the full story behind the performance. For Keanu, none of that mattered. As they left the theater, Kim leaned in and whispered, "Welcome back." He replied, "I never really left. I just took the long way home." It was early morning when Keanu reached into the pocket of his leather jacket, one he hadn't worn in weeks. He was preparing for a quiet breakfast with Kim, now healthy and smiling more than she had in years. The cool air filtered in through the balcony doors, and the sky was tinged with that soft orange that comes just before sunrise. He slipped his hand into the inside pocket to grab his phone and felt something paper-thin, something folded. Confused, he pulled it out. A letter. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Kim's. Neat, careful, a little tilted to the right. It read simply, "To my brother, on my birthday." Keanu didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His heart had already started to beat faster, not with fear, but with something heavier, deeper. A mix of love, memory, and gratitude he wasn't sure he could hold. He stepped out onto the balcony, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. The rising sun lit up the horizon as he unfolded the paper and began to read. "Keanu, you'll probably say you don't deserve a thank you, but I'm writing this anyway because it's my birthday, and I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. Not just physically, but spiritually. You gave me something no medicine ever could. You gave me presence, real, raw, unconditional love, and that saved me. I know what you gave up. I know about the roles you turned down, the chances you never chased, the scripts that piled up while I was too sick to even speak. You put your life on pause so I could find mine. You chose love over legacy. Turns out, that was your legacy." Keanu paused, his breath hitched. The words blurred for a second as his eyes welled up. He wasn't the kind of man to chase awards. He never cared for headlines. But this quiet letter, was the greatest acknowledgement he'd ever received. And Kim wasn't done. "I remember waking up one night in the hospital. You were asleep in that terrible plastic chair, your head resting on the edge of my bed. I was scared. Everything hurt. But I looked at you, and I felt safe. I knew that if I was going to make it, it would be because someone refused to let go of me." The morning wind picked up slightly, brushing against the paper in his hands. Keanu held on tighter, not letting even a corner escape. Keanu sat down on the balcony chair, legs folded, the letter resting in his lap. He didn't want to rush it. Every word was an echo from a moment they'd shared. Some painful, some beautiful, but all of them unforgettable. He continued reading. "You gave me years I never expected to have. And in those years, you didn't just give me care, you gave me dignity. You let me feel human when I felt like a patient. You let me laugh when the world was too heavy to stand. You even gave me silence when I needed it. Remember those nights? You didn't say a word. You just sat there while I cried or stared at the ceiling. That meant more than anything else, because it told me I didn't have to pretend to be strong around you." Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. The memories flooded back. Watching her sleep under pale hospital lights, hearing the steady beep of machines, smelling the antiseptic air, the exhaustion of those years had etched itself into his bones. But none of it had ever felt like a burden. It had felt like a purpose. He looked back down. "I'm better now. I laugh louder, breathe easier, and even dance sometimes when no one's watching. And yet some nights I still cry. Not from sadness, but from gratitude. Because I made it. Because I got to see you be you. Not the actor, not the public figure, just my brother. This birthday isn't just mine, it's yours too, because we earned it together." His hand gripped the edge of the paper. He didn't notice the tear that had fallen onto his jeans, darkening the denim like a tiny storm. Below the last sentence, Kim had drawn something. A tiny motorcycle, just like the one he once sold. And underneath it in small print, "You gave up the ride, but you gave me the journey." Keanu leaned back in his chair and looked up at the sky, now streaked with gold and pale blue. The clouds parted just slightly as the sun emerged fully, casting a quiet glow over the balcony, the letter, and the man holding it. Some people measured legacy in roles, awards, or headlines. For Keanu, it was this letter, this sunrise, this life that was still unfolding. Keanu stood, folding the letter with delicate hands, almost like it might tear from reverence alone. He walked back inside and slid open a drawer in his nightstand. Inside was a thick leather journal, aged and worn, the one he'd filled over the years with notes, sketches, and moments he didn't want to forget. He opened to a page marked with a ribbon, tucked the letter gently inside, and then, with slow, thoughtful strokes, wrote beneath it, "This is my greatest role," and it was never on camera. Outside, the wind rustled the nearby trees. Inside, the silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Kim's laughter echoed from the hallway as she spoke on the phone with a friend. And Keanu, quietly smiling, whispered to the journal, "Happy birthday, little sister." The velvet curtain shimmered under golden spotlights as the host stepped to the center of the stage. Tonight, we honor not just a performer, but a presence, a man whose impact reaches far beyond the screen. Please welcome the recipient of this year's Lifetime Achievement Award, Keanu Reeves. Thunderous applause erupted from every corner of the room. The crowd rose to its feet as Keanu stood, quietly adjusting his black suit jacket. He offered a modest nod to those clapping, his trademark humility as visible as ever. But inside, his heart felt heavier than usual. Not because of nerves, but because this moment was never just his. He climbed the steps with the slow, steady grace of someone who had lived many lifetimes behind the scenes, the kind of years that never make headlines. At the podium, he waited for the applause to settle before leaning into the microphone. "I'm honored," he began softly, "and I want to say something I've never said on a stage like this before." The room hushed. Many years ago, I got a call. It was the role every young actor dreams about. Lead in a blockbuster, 7 figures, career-defining. He paused, and I walked out of that audition because I got another call, one that really mattered. Eyes widened, phones lowered. Keanu looked toward the back of the hall, as if picturing something only he could see. My sister was in the hospital. The doctor said she might not make it. Another pause, longer this time. He let the weight of the memory settle before continuing. I didn't think twice. I stayed with her. I gave up that role, and yes, my career slowed down for a while. But I've never regretted it, because the role I took on instead was being her brother. You could hear a pin drop. Even the award host had tears welling up. And that role, Keanu said, voice steady, gave me everything I could have ever asked for. He let those words hang in the air, not rushing to fill the silence. Because some truths don't need drama. They just need to be felt. Keanu took a breath, his eyes misted over but focused. In the front row, faces once hardened by years in the industry now softened. A producer wiped away a tear. An actor held his hand to his heart. I didn't talk about it then, Keanu continued, because it wasn't about publicity. It was about presence, about sitting beside someone you love, not because you can fix everything, but because you refuse to let them go through it alone. A gentle murmur of agreement rolled through the room. There were nights when my sister Kim couldn't speak, couldn't eat, but she could feel that someone was there, that she mattered. And I think, when someone knows they matter, they find the strength to keep going. He paused, giving space to the memory. I'd sleep in a hospital chair, run scripts in my head I'd never get to say aloud. But none of those lines mattered. The only one that did was, "I'm here." And I said it every day, with every meal I brought, every story I read to her, every joke I made to make her smile, even when I was breaking inside. Keanu looked down at the award in his hands. People see what we do on screen, but they don't always see what we give up to get there. I gave up a role, but I got a life back. The crowd was silent, spellbound. And now, years later, she's here. Keanu lifted his eyes, searching the audience. A spotlight followed his gaze, landing on a woman in a soft blue dress, sitting quietly near the back. Kim stood, hands trembling, eyes already glistening. The entire auditorium turned and rose to their feet once more, not for the award, but for her. Keanu smiled softly, pride and emotion etched into every line on his face. She fought harder than I ever could. This award, he said, raising it slightly, belongs to her. The standing ovation thundered louder than before. But Keanu didn't soak it in. Instead, he looked at Kim like he had in every hospital room, every quiet night, and simply nodded. A silent, powerful, "We made it." After the ceremony, the crowd slowly filtered out into the evening air, but Keanu remained backstage, award in one hand, his other gripped Kim's gently as they sat in the quiet green room. The applause still echoed faintly through the hall, but neither of them spoke right away. Kim finally broke the silence. "That was beautiful," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You always knew how to say the right thing." Keanu chuckled softly. "Only when it matters." She looked at the golden statue on the table beside them. "You earned that a long time ago." "I didn't earn it alone," he said, shaking his head. "You were the reason I kept going. You were the real fight." Kim leaned back, wiping away a tear. "There were days I thought I wouldn't make it, but you gave me no choice. You loved me through it." He smiled. "You made it easy. You kept showing up, too." There was a long pause, not of discomfort, but of shared memory. All the hospital nights, the fear, the quiet laughter, the moments when words weren't enough, but presence was. "Funny," Kim said, looking around the room. "I always thought this world would never understand what you did for me." "They don't have to," Keanu replied. "You understand. That's enough." A gentle knock on the door interrupted them. The event coordinator peeked in. "Sorry to disturb, but there's a line of people outside who just want to shake your hand." Keanu glanced at Kim. She grinned. "Go, but don't take too long." He stood, kissed her forehead gently, and made his way toward the hallway. Outside, a crowd of fans, fellow actors, and industry leaders waited. They didn't rush him. They simply held out their hands, eyes full of gratitude. Not for a blockbuster performance, but for being the kind of man who could walk away from fame to keep a promise. As he moved down the line, the world finally saw not just the actor Keanu Reeves, but the brother, the caregiver, the man who chose love over legacy, and made that choice legendary. And somewhere behind him, Kim smiled. They had rewritten the script together. Griffith Park was quiet that afternoon, bathed in the soft amber light of a fading sun. Keanu and Kim walked side by side, their footsteps slow, unhurried, as if time had finally surrendered to them. Leaves crunched beneath their shoes, and the distant chatter of a family picnicking nearby blended with the rustle of trees in the breeze. For the first time in years, there was no urgency, no hospital monitors, no scripts waiting in trailer. Just two siblings rediscovering something more enduring than fame: peace. They had walked these trails as children, chasing each other around the bushes, pretending they were explorers charting unknown land. Keanu looked over at Kim and smiled gently. She was stronger now, her hair thick again, her cheeks flush with life. But her pace was still cautious, as if her body remembered too well the weight it once carried. Keanu kept his hand close, not out of fear, but out of instinct. He had learned over the years that love wasn't grand gestures. It was presence, a hand within reach, a silence shared, a slow walk through old memories. They reached a wooden bench overlooking the hills. Kim lowered herself down and exhaled deeply, as if setting down more than just her weight. Keanu remained standing, hands in his jacket pockets, scanning the horizon. The Hollywood sign stood off in the distance, a symbol of dreams he once chased, and then, willingly, paused. He sat beside her, brushing his elbow against hers. "Do you ever think about that role you gave up?" Kim asked, her voice light but sincere. Keanu turned, the sun catching the edge of his profile. "I do. Sometimes." "Regret it?" He shook his head slowly. "Not for a second." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she leaned back, letting the sun warm her face. After a long pause, she whispered, "You gave up Hollywood for a hospital room." He turned to her, eyes soft but certain. "And I got a lifetime in return." They sat there quietly, the wind tugging at their sleeves, the sun setting in slow motion. Neither of them needed to say anything else, not anymore. As the sun dipped lower behind the hills, the sky turned from gold to a rich orange, streaked with hints of violet. Kim reached into her bag and pulled out a worn photograph, creased at the edges but preserved like a sacred memory. It showed them both as kids, arms around each other, standing in front of a cheap toy motorcycle Keanu had once bought with his paper route savings. He chuckled softly when he saw it. "You kept that?" Kim nodded. "It reminded me of who we were before life got complicated." Keanu studied the photo for a moment, then folded it gently and handed it back. We're still those kids, just a little slower now." Kim laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was full, round, real. "You know, I used to lie awake at night in the hospital, thinking I'd never laugh again." "You did," he said. "You laughed the night we burned those cookies." She smirked. "Only because you blamed the oven." They sat in silence again, the kind that spoke louder than conversation. A jogger passed behind them. A dog barked in the distance. For them, the world was reduced to this bench, this view, this memory carved in light. Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook, his journal. He'd written in it every day during her worst nights. Some pages were tear-stained, others smudged by midnight coffee. He flipped to a random entry and read aloud. January 12th. She opened her eyes today and said, "Is it still raining?" I told her it was snowing even though it wasn't. Because she loves snow more than rain, and I wanted her to smile. Kim blinked, touched. "You really wrote that?" He nodded. I had to hold on to something. She reached over, placing her hand on his. "You held on to me." The breeze picked up slightly, rustling the trees and carrying the scent of pine and distant food trucks. Kim leaned her head gently against Keanu's shoulder. For a while, neither spoke. There was no need. The silence between them had been earned, built from shared pain, unconditional love, and the kind of loyalty the world rarely got to witness. After a moment, Kim said, "There's something people still don't get about you." Keanu smiled faintly. "What's that?" "They think you're quiet because you're mysterious, but you're quiet because you listen, because you carry so much." He didn't respond right away. His eyes were on the horizon where the last slice of sun was sinking behind the hills. "Maybe," he said softly. "Or maybe I'm just afraid that if I talk too much, I'll say something I can't take back." Kim gave his hand a light squeeze. "Whatever it is, I've never needed you to say anything to know what you mean." Birdsong filled the air as evening settled in. Lights flickered on in the distance, cars beginning their nightly crawl through the streets below. But up here, above the noise, time felt slower. Softer. Keanu turned to her. "Do you regret any of it?" She shook her head. "Not 1 second. Because even on the worst days, I knew I was loved. I knew I mattered. That's more than most people get in a lifetime." He nodded, swallowing hard. Then it was all worth it. As the sky turned dark blue and the first stars began to appear, they stood up together. Kim took one slow step, then another, and Keanu matched her pace. Their steps weren't fast, but they were steady. They walked through the fading light, shadows long behind them, hearts anchored in a moment that neither the world nor time could take away. The past was painful, the future uncertain, but the present, it was perfect. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. The studio lights were soft, casting a warm hue over the intimate stage set for a rare live sit-down with Keanu Reeves. It wasn't the kind of publicity he usually entertained. He preferred the quiet route, the low profile. But tonight was different. The host, a seasoned journalist known for gentle candor, smiled across at him from her chair. "This is something people have waited years for," she said. "You've given the world some unforgettable performances, but I want to start with something more personal." Keanu leaned forward slightly, his black jacket crinkling with the shift. He offered a soft nod, prepared. The host paused, then asked, "There's a story that circulated for years about a role you turned down, right when your career was about to skyrocket. You never talked about it. Until now." Keanu didn't blink. He simply folded his hands in his lap and said, "Yeah, I know the story." The audience hushed. Cameras zoomed in. "I was offered a lead in a major film," he continued. "I'd been working hard for it. Multiple auditions, the kind of break actors dream about. But the same week the final call came in, my sister, Kim, had a relapse. The doctors weren't optimistic." He paused. The host didn't interrupt. "I left the audition building, didn't call him back. I didn't even open the offer letter, I just went to her. A ripple of emotion moved through the crowd. The host's voice lowered. You didn't even open it? He shook his head. No, because nothing in that envelope was more important than holding her hand. The host leaned back, visibly moved. What made you certain that was the right decision? She asked. Keanu looked thoughtful. I wasn't certain, but love doesn't wait for certainty. You just show up, over and over again. A brief silence. Then the host asked, if you had to go back, would you do it all again? Keanu's reply was immediate. I never stopped. The words landed like a soft thunder. The room fell into reverent stillness. The interview clip, even in real time, began trending within minutes. But back in the studio, the mood remained grounded, almost sacred. The host looked down at her notes, but quickly abandoned them. I've interviewed Oscar winners, heads of state, she said, her voice catching slightly. But what you just said, that hit a different place. Keanu smiled gently, as if trying to deflect the attention, but the moment was already larger than him. There were rumors back then, the host continued. People said you disappeared, that you were unreliable, moody. Some even thought you'd given up acting altogether, and you never corrected them. He shrugged. I didn't need to. The people who mattered knew where I was. Which was? By her bedside, reading, laughing when we could, crying when we couldn't, trying to make time feel less cruel. The camera panned to audience members, visibly tearing up. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had taken that role? The host asked gently. Keanu nodded. Sometimes. I've even watched the movie. The actor who replaced me did a fantastic job. I kept articles in a folder labeled Alternate Universe, but that's not the world I wanted to live in. Mine had her in it. The host paused, clearly moved. And today? Today she's alive. She's strong. She's everything I could have hoped for. And that folder? It stays closed now. The audience erupted, not in applause but in silence, a kind of shared reverence that needed no noise to validate its depth. Keanu wasn't performing, he was revealing. And the world, watching from thousands of living rooms, phones, and desktops, leaned in closer, not to see a movie star, but a man who had once chosen love over legacy and never regretted it. Later in the interview, the host leaned forward, voice softer now. What do you want people to take away from your story? Keanu looked down for a long moment, his thumb tracing the edge of his coffee cup. That sometimes the biggest roles you'll ever play aren't on a screen. They're in real life, and they don't come with scripts or awards. They come with quiet moments, like holding someone's hand through a storm. The audience listened, spellbound. He continued, Fame is loud, love is quiet. I think I always knew which one would last longer. Backstage, Kim sat watching a monitor with the crew. She wore a wide smile and had tears in her eyes. The assistant next to her handed her a tissue, and she whispered, He never talks about himself like this. When the interview wrapped, the host stood to hug him. It wasn't the typical showbiz ending. It was real. And in that hug, the years of sacrifice, silence, and unwavering devotion were felt. Not just by her, but by every viewer at home. That night, clips from the interview flooded social media. Headlines read, Keanu Reeves redefines success with one sentence. The most humble star in Hollywood. Reeves reminds us what matters. I never stopped. The interview that changed everything. But Keanu didn't read the articles. He didn't refresh Twitter or check trending tabs. He simply went home, walked through the door, and found Kim curled on the couch, the TV still playing in the background. She looked up at him and grinned. You finally let the world see what I've known all along, she said. Keanu smiled, sitting beside her. I didn't do it for them. I know, she whispered. That's why it mattered. They sat in silence, the screen flickering, the night stretching peacefully around them. And for all the lights, applause, and fame he could have had years ago, Keanu had something far greater in that moment. He had presence. He had purpose. He had her. The house was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes with sleep or rest, but the deeper, aching quiet that follows an absence. The sort of silence that folds itself into the walls, creeps under doors, and wraps around furniture like a shroud. Keanu stood alone in the hallway, one hand on the door frame to Kim's bedroom. The morning light had begun to seep through the curtains, golden and gentle. But her bed was still. Her chest no longer rose with breath. The monitor had long since gone silent. She was gone. No alarms, no final words, just peace. He didn't cry, not yet. There was something sacred about the stillness of her passing, something he couldn't bring himself to disturb. So instead, he sat at her bedside, took her hand, and whispered, "Thank you for staying as long as you did." The hospice nurse, Evelyn, entered quietly. She gave him a small nod of respect. "She went with grace," she murmured. "No pain, just rest." Keanu nodded. She always liked soft endings. The next few hours passed in a gentle haze. Phone calls, quiet hugs from friends, the kind of small, respectful gestures that fill the air after loss. But Keanu remained grounded in one task: packing her room himself. No assistance, no service. Only him. As he folded sweaters, lifted books, and tucked away framed photos, a small wooden box fell from the top shelf of her closet. It hit the floor with a dull thud, the kind that made him pause. He crouched down, heart thudding. Inside the box were a few old trinkets, bracelets from childhood, a faded backstage pass from one of his early premieres, and at the very bottom, a sealed envelope. It was addressed in Kim's handwriting. To Keanu, "Only if I'm gone." He didn't open it right away. He stared at it, fingers trembling, his breath caught in his throat. This was the letter that was never supposed to come, the one she probably wrote years ago and hoped he'd never find. But now it was here, waiting. And so, with the house still silent and the sun beginning its descent outside, Keanu walked out into the backyard, sat down on the bench they once built together. The stars would be out soon, and he began to read. "My dearest Keanu, if you're reading this, well then, I guess I finally let go. But not before I got to tell you how much you meant to me in life, or maybe I said it 1,000 times and just needed to say it one more, in case you ever doubted. You were my anchor, my breath, my stubborn, gentle, fiercely loyal big brother who walked away from Hollywood when the cameras were rolling just to sit beside me when my body gave out. I watched you trade red carpets for cafeteria trays, scripts for blood test results, fame for love." Keanu blinked hard. The letter blurred for a moment in the silver pool light of dusk. The soft wind rustled the trees, like the world was holding its breath with him. "I used to wonder if you ever regretted it, if you thought about the career that might have been. But I know you. I know you never looked back. Because when you chose me, you made me feel like I wasn't dying. I was worth saving. And you did save me, Kay. Not just with medicine or money, but with your eyes, with your presence, with the way you never let me feel like I was a burden, even when I could barely lift a spoon." He swallowed a sob. The letter felt heavy now, like it carried the weight of every day they fought together. "They all say I was lucky to survive leukemia, but I know the truth. I was lucky to have you." He closed his eyes, the paper trembling in his grip. "One last thing, big brother. Live now. You gave me all of your days so I could have more. You held your breath so I could catch mine. But your journey didn't end with mine. You've got more to give. To yourself. To the world. Make another movie. Write another poem. Fall in love. Ride fast. Laugh loud. Do all the things you put on hold. Because I'll be with you on every red carpet, in every sunrise, in every page of your journey. And when the wind brushes your shoulder, or you hear that one song we used to sing off key. That's me. Still here, always. La, Kim. Keanu stared up at the stars. They seemed different tonight, brighter somehow, like they were listening. He folded the letter with shaking hands and tucked it into the leather-bound journal that rarely left his side. Then he stood in the stillness of the garden, where Kim's favorite tree rustled softly in the wind. The moonlight spilled across the petals of flowers she had planted herself, each bloom a quiet echo of resilience. He placed a hand on the bark of the tree and whispered, "I hear you." For a long time, he just stood there, breathing, remembering, in silence, in peace, in forever. The idea came to him in the middle of a sleepless night. Keanu was flipping through Kim's old letters, her handwriting soft, curling, always marked by a gentle optimism, even when she was in pain. A line stood out, scribbled in the margin of a note she wrote during one of her chemo cycles. "Maybe one day people will understand that love is stronger than fame." He stared at those words like they were a script. And that's when the thought hit him. Not another blockbuster, not a high-octane chase through a green-screen city. Something different. Something real. Something about late nights beside a hospital bed, shared laughter in waiting rooms, the way a single moment of kindness could echo through decades. Keanu called Maya, an up-and-coming screenwriter he'd worked with before, and pitched it in one breathless conversation. "It's about a brother and sister," he said, and the role he didn't take, because love called first. Maya was silent for a second, then whispered, "That's the story the world needs." For months, they worked in secret. Keanu didn't want a studio involved. He funded it himself, quietly, as he always did, with no press release or red carpet fanfare. He brought in indie director Alice Munro, known for her raw, emotional style. Every person involved in the film was chosen not for their fame, but their empathy. He titled it, "The Light That Stayed." The script didn't follow traditional structure. It moved like memory, looping back and forth between past and present, showing a young man walking away from the biggest opportunity of his life, just to sit at his sister's bedside. The film didn't offer a dramatic miracle or a last-minute rescue. Instead, it offered stillness, presence, real love in the quiet moments. Keanu refused to act in it. When the producers asked why, he said, "This one's not about me. It never was." They cast a relatively unknown actor named Ethan Ramirez to play the brother. When Ethan came in to audition, he didn't know what he was reading. After the scene, he looked up, eyes glassy, and said, "This is based on someone real." Keanu nodded once. Ethan didn't ask more. Filming began in a quiet home nestled in the California hills. No elaborate set designs, no booming soundtrack, just dim lamplight, handwritten letters, a hospital bed, and the gentle creak of a recliner beside it. Every day on set, Keanu arrived early, but not to direct. He'd bring coffee for the crew, sit in the back, and simply watch. Sometimes he'd close his eyes and listen. When Ethan read a line pulled directly from one of Keanu's real letters to Kim, "I can't promise tomorrow, but I can give you today," his hands trembled. Even the crew was affected. The sound technician wept behind the mixer board during a scene where the sister character collapsed into the brother's arms. The makeup artist started leaving sticky notes of encouragement around the set, inspired by Kim's real-life habit of leaving hopeful scribbles on Keanu's scripts. But no one felt it more than Keanu. On the final day of filming, the cast and crew gathered around him. Alice Munro handed him a single envelope. Inside was a still frame from the final scene, Ethan and the actress playing Kim sitting on a porch swing at sunset. On the back, Alice had written, "You didn't just make a film, you gave us a reason to believe in goodness again." Keanu nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then we did it right." The editing process was slow and meticulous. Keanu personally oversaw the final cut, not to polish it for awards, but to ensure it stayed honest. In the last frame of the film, after the credits faded, one sentence appeared in white letters on black. For Kim. Always. The film premiered quietly at a mid-sized international film festival, far from Hollywood's glittering spotlight. Keanu didn't walk the red carpet. Instead, he sat in the back row of the theater, cap pulled low, hands folded. He wasn't there to be seen, he was there to feel. And feel he did. When the final credits rolled, the silence in the theater was so deep it bordered on reverence. Then came the applause, slow, then rising, thunderous. But Keanu didn't stand. He simply looked at the screen one last time, at the words glowing in white. For Kim. Always. The next morning, critics were stunned. Reviews poured in, calling it the most honest film of the decade and a love letter to humanity through the eyes of grief and grace. Awards followed, though Keanu never accepted them in person. He sent quiet statements, often just one line: "This story belongs to her." In every interview, cast and crew echoed the same message. This was Keanu's love letter. The film didn't just win trophies, it healed people. Letters arrived from viewers who'd lost siblings, who felt seen, who found hope again. And somewhere in Keanu's quiet home, next to a candle and a weathered photo of Kim, rested the original script. Handwritten across the cover were 4 words. She was the story. Keanu walked slowly through the remnants of an old movie set. The lighting rigs were gone. The cameras were packed away. The once bustling soundstage now held only echoes and dust motes drifting lazily in shafts of morning light. The faded chalk marks on the floor hinted at where actors once stood, where lines had been delivered that would move millions. But now, it was quiet. And in that quiet, Keanu found peace. His boots clicked softly against the concrete as he wandered toward the far end, where the director's chair still stood. It bore his name, but faint, worn from time and sun. He rested his hand on the back of it, fingers tracing the outline of the lettering. Then he sat down, not as a star, but as a man remembering. In a gentle voiceover, his thoughts filled the space. Fame fades, film fades, but love, that echoes. He paused. A memory flickered in his eyes, something only he could see. They offered me the world once. Lights, headlines, applause. But my sister needed a hand to hold, and that mattered more. The camera panned slowly around the empty set. The silence was cinematic, almost sacred. This was an incredible story, but more than that, it was true. A flashback played in Keanu's mind. Kim's smile as she sat in that custom sidecar. The sound of her laughter while baking cookies. Her handwriting on a folded letter tucked in his coat. The warmth of her hand in his during her darkest days. I've walked red carpets. I've stood beneath spotlights. But the most important stage I've ever been on was the floor beside her hospital bed. He stood again, walked to the open studio doors. The wind caught his coat, tugged it gently, like a whisper from the past. He looked out across the lot. Life moved beyond the walls. Cars passing, people talking, stories still being written. If you're lucky in life, you'll get a moment where you have to choose between glory and grace. I chose love, and I'd do it again. He turned once more, facing the quiet set, bowed his head in a silent goodbye. Then he left. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. If you believe that love is worth more than legacy, that sacrifice is a sign of strength, and that family comes before fame, share this incredible story with someone you love. Tell us in the comments, what's something you've given up for someone you care about, or what would you be willing to give up if it meant saving them? And if this story reminded you of what truly matters, subscribe for more powerful, emotional, real-life moments that prove the human heart still beats strongest in silence. Because sometimes the greatest role we'll ever play is just being there